Good afternoon and welcome to this afternoon's session about the Power Platform from a Microsoft 365 developer perspective. My name's Ben Haynes and I'm going to go through with you all different aspects about my journey using the Power Platform coming from the Microsoft 365 developer perspective. First of all, I'd just like to give a big shout out to all today's sponsors, and I encourage you to go and look at their websites and engage with their services to see how they can help you on your Power Platform journey. My name's Ben Haynes. I work for a consultancy, a computer consultancy company on the South Coast, Sultans, of which I am their Power Platform lead. I'm going to talk about my journey to getting there as the process as we go through today's session. Any questions, please ask me in the chat, and I will endeavour to answer them. I can be found on LinkedIn here under Ben Haynes, or on Twitter as Disappointment B. Disappointment B being one of those things you do before you actually know what you're going to be using your Twitter handle for. Something you tell your kids, don't have a silly name for your email, and then lo and behold, your dad goes and does it anyway. So, I am an Office 365 developer. I am not a Dynamics. I don't come from that world. It is only in the last year that I found out before CDS it was called Xrm. So there are lots of different things that I'm not aware of, and I'm going to show you now how I've come to Dataverse as it is now from the Office 365 perspective. So my journey, I started off working with SharePoint. When it first came out, it was called Tyho, and then when it came out in 2001, we used to have to write web parts in JavaScript, and the back end was not SQL, it was WebDAV. So I had to learn WebDAV and talk to it that way. So there was a lot of that sort of errand. Next thing that came along were VB.NET web parts and site definitions and something called the Business Data Catalog, which was a way of being able to get external data in. And if you compared that to the way you could get external data in now via Flow, it would blow your mind. It was a horrible thing. But we were getting better because we could write back-end code, we could work with these web parts and build what we wanted. And we could start to create business solutions against document libraries and lists and things like that, and start helping people to build business processes. But a lot of it was very code-driven. Next came along when we had the sort of move towards a bit of the sort of SharePoint Online to being able to use these things called SharePoint apps. I don't know if anyone ever worked with those, but they were hard work. You used to have them talk to them and get the information back. But we then also had InfoPath, and for me the great thing was we had CSOM, which was the client service object model, which allowed me to, using C# to be able to talk to SharePoint from a client. So we're getting there, we're beginning to be able to create applications, and we've got ways of automating them, but it was nothing like no code or anything like that at that point. Next thing that came along was the ability to use JS Link, and this allowed us to not to use InfoPath, but to use JavaScript links that we put into the page, and we were able to change the way that SharePoint form looked. So we're beginning to get that sort of automation, filling in things, giving people information, maybe create some hierarchical data, go away and use a little bit of REST API and go and call what we want and bring it back in. So we're beginning to create solutions, but it was still hard. And then the other thing we had at that point was the marvellous PMP, which has got better and better and better. And one of the things that I used to use quite a lot at that point was Powershell, because I was able to call different aspects of that Powershell and start automating things. And so it's a little bit easier to be able to just say, I want to add this into a list, I want to add this into a library. Not quite there, but a lot easier. Then along came the SharePoint framework, and of course PMP adopted this, made things a lot easier to work with. Lo and behold, we were straight back to 2001 with JavaScript web parts again. So quite confusing, quite difficult to work with at times, having to learn yet another language of TypeScript. So I found it hard, and I was getting to that point when you start to think to yourself, I'm not sure whether developing is still for me. There's always so much to learn. I'm not feeling, happy in this area. I'm having to learn all this TypeScript stuff again. Can't use my C#. What's happening? That development churn, and it can begin to get to you. But then along came Power Apps. Now, the world changed for me at that point, because I just thought, no, hold on a minute. I can start creating forms and applications that sit inside my SharePoint database, bad word there. Come on to why that's bad, slip of the tongue there. So I can start talking to my SharePoint lists and libraries and put stuff on there, and I don't have to worry about writing the thing that talks to them. And I can use this wonderful thing called Flow, and I can start connecting things. And again, at that point, I moved away from that SharePoint framework feeling of thinking, oh, don't want to learn anymore. To actually, I want to learn this, I want to know about this, I want to know how that works. At this point in time, Dynamics nowhere near me. So I then moved into, when I was talking about that, my Power Apps and Flow. So at that point, Power Apps was called Power Apps, and Flow was called Power Automate was called Flow. I didn't care where the assets were stored, so I was off myself creating flows against SharePoint lists. I was going and creating all sorts of different Canvas apps against my lists and libraries, making it look nice. I was working with like a modern info path. I'd understood JSON from some of my other days, so everything made sense to me when I was looking at how things were working and so on. And I just thought, this is wonderful. I don't have to reply. I don't have to rely on any of the key bits to do anymore. That's all in there for me. So I want to add stuff, that works. I want to go and move a document somewhere else, that works. I want to go and talk to OneDrive, that works. I can just go and talk to it. I can go and create a PDF straight off a piece of HTML. I don't got to do anything apart from put it in a few actions. This stuff's marvellous. So I was interested. I wanted to push this stuff forward. So Dynamics 365, where did any of that fit in my life at this point? That's got nothing to do with me. I'm using the Power Platform to go and create what I want. I'm going creating forms. I'm going creating applications. I'm building inspection routines. I'm building non-conformity applications. I'm building all my business processes using Microsoft 365 in a world I understand. Nothing. I'm nowhere near Dynamics at this point. But then, in July 2019, everything changed. At the Microsoft Inspire conference, Microsoft said, we're going to start taking away some of these connectors and they're going to become premium. You're going to have to buy these licenses that are called per app and per user so that you can use something called the CDS. I don't know what that is, but I know I want those connectors that are disappearing. What the hell am I going to do? And all of a sudden, this big Dynamics 365 suddenly appeared on top of my radar, and I needed to look at how we were going to do it, because we couldn't just stick with those simple applications I was writing in Power Apps and so on. I couldn't talk to SQL anymore. I had no way of getting to anything relational. Couldn't talk to my Azure SQL databases. This was a big thing. Microsoft were pushing me down this road. Now, at the time, I felt this was wrong. In retrospect, I completely understand why they've done it, and it has made a difference to me, and it's made a real difference to how I develop solutions and what solutions I do develop. So, after July 2019 and it coming in October 2019 and the change in licenses, what has Dynamics 365 got to do with me? It's got everything to do with me. I need to know it now. And also, on top of all of this, people are now asking me, and quite rightly, where are these assets stored? How do I find out what people are doing? How do I know who's doing what? How many times is this being run? How many times is this being shared with? Well, all of that's in there, but all of it's in there by looking in some of the screens at that point that might have a bit of dynamics on it, all that information stored in a particular way. I've got to learn to understand that area and understand what all my different connectors do. I'm going to take on this Power Platform as it had been called by this point. I needed to know all across it. I needed to know my compliance and governance, and I needed to know the back end of where it's going. All of a sudden, the fact that approvals were created in something called the CDS was relevant to me, whereas 3 months previous, it certainly wasn't. So now I've done all that, we'll be waiting for me to go in straight into have a go at SharePoint and tell you why it's awful and why you shouldn't be using it. And I'm not going to do that, because SharePoint, I believe, is great for tactical solutions. It allows you to create things simply in an environment that people understand. You can go away and start using templates for lists. it's really good at that. It's good at what it does. Yeah, it's not a database. I shouldn't be going and creating relational tables, but I shouldn't have been doing that prior to me learning Power Apps and Power Automate and some of the Power BI. I shouldn't be doing that. So what if I want it and it's linear data that all sits in one row and it's under 500 records? It is a lovely thing to use. People understand it. You can create nice tactical solutions quickly that solve business problems for a small area. So let's have a look at that and see what I mean. And then we're going to talk about this onboarding app that I'm going to do. I'm going to show it inside of SharePoint, and then we're going to build it out into the different areas so you can see how I've learned moving from my Microsoft 365, Office 365, if you like, perspective to start thinking about and using Dynamics. So here's SharePoint. Nice SharePoint site. Here's our HR, and in here we're going to start a new starters process. So if I click on new starters up here, we get taken to a list. Now this is a nice list. It's all part of the new Microsoft Lists templates that I see here. Microsoft Lists makes it look like it's its own citizen, which I suppose it is, but still sitting in SharePoint ultimately. And I can say I want to use that list. I've got an onboarding list, and it goes in and it puts in all these different parts of information for me so that I can begin to see from here what aspects of it that I want to use. So I've created that, and I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, okay, that's great. I know that my administrators can come in here. They can add new things for this new starter. The new starter will already be in there, so I know that about that part of the process, they've already got their AD. This is just about what happens when they start on the different days. I can go and set up their mentors. So actually, this list is doing quite a lot for me. But it would be really nice if when those people start and they get their mobile phone, they get them and they can look on that mobile phone and it says, right, you're all starting today. Here's your onboarding activities. Tick them off when you know that they're done. So we're just looking at something linear that's talking against a linear list. So we've created our Canvas app built directly against that list. And in here, I can see as that user, my new starter tasks talking directly off that list. I can go and click on them. I can go and say, okay, I'm interested in doing this tour of the office. When's this one? I've done that now. I've done my tour of the office. I click this. Oh, look, there it is, but I don't need to go and do anything with it because it's all read-only, but I can go and actually say, that is complete, and here's the day on which I completed it. And we say yes to that, and we have a simple Power App that's built, working with data I understand. It's given to the user. The user doesn't need to know it's SharePoint. We can scrub all the data down once they've done, or go and put it somewhere else if we want to preserve the fact that they've done it. But we've got ourselves a little nice starting onboard, and SharePoint has been absolutely great for doing that. Okay, so there's our SharePoint. As I've said before, and I'll say it again and again and again, SharePoint's not a database. So if I suddenly got something relational in there, so say I wanted to do a bit of the mentoring and say, actually, as a mentor for these people, you need to know this, and then associate what they know back into the other list, that's relational, and I shouldn't be doing that. There are better ways of doing that. So what do we do? What do we do at this point? So I've now got to this point where Microsoft are now talking about Dataverse, which is what it's called now. For me then, it's the CDS, Common Data Service, and I've got to think about how I start using that. And I'm presented with this screen that's a bit daunting, doesn't really make sense. It's not really coming from my SharePoint world. It's not nicely laid out. I can't really see where the security is. I start pressing some of these buttons and stuff suddenly starts looking like I'm back in the early 2000s, like I'm working with SharePoint 2001, and they've got CRM all over them, or maybe they've got Dynamics 365 all over them. They've got icons that I don't understand. It's a very strange world to suddenly go into. So I was at a session and I was talking to William Dorrington from Hitachi Solutions. And he said to me, and this is where the light bulb really went ping for me, he said, think of the Common Data Service like a kitchen. all the elements of that kitchen are within easy reach. So you can make whatever you need. So if you think about the common data service and the tables that exist in that common data service all around you, when you want to make something, it's available for you to just go and take the tools that you need to go and build that. So we can use our colander, for example, for multiple things within our recipe. So we could use a table in multiple solutions, allowing us to start producing compelling solutions where the data begins to link up and we can start to actually make that data come alive. So a SharePoint list is great, but we don't want to make loads of different solutions talk to it. Dataverse allows us to do that, but it also allows us to do that in a controlled manner by using those tables to create all the elements that we need so that we can control how they're used everywhere else. And this is quite a difference and a different way of thinking than with the SharePoint, where I'm just trying to utilize elements of productivity and bring all those elements of productivity together to create a business solution. Now what I'm doing is bringing all that data together, because the data is the thing that's key, and then using those productivity elements around that to produce what I want. And that's quite a different way of thinking. So let's go and have a look at in Dataverse, straight into the big old Dataverse, and have a look at our onboarding app in there and what we might be able to do with that. So here's our first daunting screen. Well, it's not that daunting if you're coming from the Office 365 world. You understand this. You see your Canvas apps at the side. Right, this is all good. We're off. So where's this Dataverse thing? It's called Common Data Service. Is it called Dataverse? Yeah, it is. It's changed its name recently, but everything's up to date yet. If anybody out there is a SharePoint developer, they still will remember that even though webs haven't existed since 2003, they're called sites underneath. It's still called webs. So I'm not holding my breath as to when all of this will change. On the side here, we click on data, and suddenly all of these things appear, and we are into our Dataverse. Now, it looks quite innocuous to start with, but actually what we're looking at in here is very powerful. It's got a lot in it, and it's time to start getting our hands dirty and having a look inside. So the first thing we do is click on tables. Now, tables are all the tables that exist within our database, and I am going to talk about Dataverse as a database because coming from Office 365, knowing a bit of SQL, thinking about it for me as a database makes sense. But the one thing I would say on top of that is here we have something called tables. Now, they used to be called entities. Now, when they were called entities, when people asked me what they were, I would say, well, you can think about entities as a database table. Now they've changed them to tables, and I understand a bit more about what's going on underneath. I would say you can think about them a bit like entities, because they are not just, and then let's click on one of these. Okay, so if we go into here and we're looking at our custom table here, let's go and click on one of these. So let's go and look at privilege, for example. So this is a table I've created. Now, what you'll notice at the top there, across the top, is we've got these relationships, and we've got these basic rules, and we've got views, and we've got forms and dashboards. That's because all of these things are associated with this table. So yes, in here, we've got all of our different columns. So we can see all of our different columns in here, and they're all different data types. Beginning to look a bit SQL-y, a bit databasey. But also I've got this tab up here, which lets me see the relationships. Again, okay, a little bit databasey, I understand that. I can have a relationship to another table, and another table can have a relationship to mine. A little bit confusing to start with, because I don't have to build any little middle tables. It's doing all that for me. But then I've got these things on the side here. I've got these views. Well, what are these? So I'll go and have a look at one of these. So we're going to add a view. Let's go and take a different table so we can see the data in a little bit differently. So we're just going to go and have a look at managed. And then inside of here, we'll go and look at our onboarding table. Towards the way I'm showing. Okay, let's go and have a look at our onboarding table. So this is the table that we're now using for our onboarding application, our solution that we're going to create. But before we do any more, we're going to get it all set up. So it's a bit like creating a list inside SharePoint, but it's not quite, because we've now created all our tables, and we're going to go and look at our views, which is what we were talking about. We're going to go now to new view. So we're going to add a new view in here. So let's just call it demo. And then we go and click on create. And we can go and start adding tables into it. So we can say, right, okay, so there's the employee, there's their mentor, there's they're completed on, there's description. So again, some of the same data. But it does look a bit odd. Obviously, we've got nothing in there. That's one of the reasons it looks odd. But also, we can see that as we were dragging, we were having these strange sort of things at the side here. So let's just, if I just take this one out, pop it back, so we'll just remove it. One thing we see on the side here is we've got this box with an arrow pointing on. Why is that? Well, that's because I'm using a lookup. What's a lookup? I created a relationship. So I created a relationship to a user table that comes for you for nothing out of the box, that sits down below and stores your AD users in it. So people within your tenancy, they go in there. I can then start calling them as I would the person field inside SharePoint. Now, this is where Dynamics starts to come in, because that table, I call it free. There are a number of free tables that come because they're used behind the scenes inside Dynamics. So by they come in, they're already classified. They already have all these fields in them that I need. Where are those fields coming from? They're coming from something called the Common Data Model, which is an agreement between Adobe, SAP, and Microsoft to produce tables in a way where they are the same across all of those solutions. And the CDS or Dataverse is Microsoft's implementation of it. So I've got loads and loads of fields in there. Now, I am not going to profess at this point to know what they are, how they all work, and how they all relate to each other, because as we know from the subject of this particular session, I am not a science Dynamics developer. I'm not a Dynamics app maker. I'm just trying to use the tools that I've got. So I've learned that I need to use users to do that. There's no point in creating, there's no point in reinventing the wheel. So I've got my view here. I go and create the view, I can save it, and then I can go and publish it. And if I go back, I can go and start creating forms. So this is, I can go and add a form on here. And what I can start doing now is creating the fields that I want based on the fields that I've created or exist within my table, and I can go and start creating a form on them. I can actually start going and viewing data that sits inside other areas by adding a view into here, and that view can go and look at, say, the users table and return all the users who are associated with this row. It's beginning to get relational, it's beginning to get interesting. We've got to think about how we start doing all of that together, and start structuring all of that for the solution that we want. So when we go back now, you can see we've got forms, we can add dashboards, we can even add charts, we can go and look at that data. We've got these columns. So what's this table looking like? It's looking to me more like an entity. So we've got an area, an entity, where we can go and store things, because it's got all of these different parts associated with it. And then when I'm ready, I can use those parts as I want to, down inside a Canvas app if I want to, and it understands the relationships. Or using a special app called a model-driven app. And a model-driven app is something where I can take each bit of those parts that we were looking at and put them together to produce a solution that I need. So in here, we've got these apps, and I've got these nice Canvas apps, but what I could actually go and do is, if I've got a model-driven app here, so if I click on New Starters, what it's doing is it's taking that onboarding entity that I'm working with, or table, and it's given me the views. So I can go and say, right, there's my first view, and then if I go and go new, it pulls the first form that it's got. So if I was to add my fields and everything into there, I'm beginning to build an application. I'm getting those building blocks. It's beginning to do what I want without having to go through the canvas. I haven't got to connect everything up. It's all in there. So I'm getting all these different bits of the entity that I can start using in the solution that I need. And it's important to sort of get your head around the fact that with the SharePoint, you take it, you use it as a data source. With Dataverse, yes, you could do the same. You could use it as a data source. But also, you go and create the bits that you want, and then you can go and start building the application that you want with much lower level security, with much more granular control over how things calculate, how they move around. Flow can connect to all of this. Power Automate can connect to all of this. So your skills that you learned and understood as an Office 365 developer using the Power Platform don't go away. They do become slightly more complicated because you're working with a much greater product in the way that it does and how those entities work with each other. One of the things I would say to be aware of, and I'll come back to this, is you need to start thinking that your answer isn't always in SharePoint. So when you're googling, you say SharePoint, add document, loads of information comes back. When you're dealing with this, you may be searching for CDS. You may be searching for Common Data Service. You may actually have to say, okay, how do I do this? How do I do a calculated field in Dynamics 365 to get the right answer to how you do a calculated field inside Dataverse? So you've got to start learning some of the language in order to identify what you need and how you work with it. So there is a learning there, but learning the language is the most important thing for helping you develop and understand all of these different areas. I'd say that particularly when you're dealing with a flow inside of Power Automate, you might want to be able to go and get records that are associated with the relationship that you've created. And actually, that can be quite complicated to do because you've got to start wondering about something called fetch XML because that seems the easiest way of doing it, but it's not. You might as well use OData. And that brings me on to a fantastic tool that I would suggest that you get to know and first of all frightened me, and that is the Xrm Toolbox. Inside the Xrm Toolbox, when you download it, it's got all stuff to do. It says about Power Platform, Dataverse, and there's loads and loads of community-driven tools in there that allow you, A, to learn, but B, to look at what's going on underneath the hood inside your Dataverse, and that will start to cement how this thing works, what's going on underneath, how things move around, how you talk to different entities. The main tool that I use and I would shout out for is something called Fetch XML. Don't be deceived by the name. It's just something that builds up queries so that you can query your different tables and get the results back. You can link tables together. You can do conditions. You can do ordering. But the really great thing it does is that when you hit view, you can do Power Automate parameters and it gives you the data query that you need to go and get the data that you've produced in the query editor there. And I would suggest that that tool is great. It's brilliant for understanding and it's brilliant for focusing your mind on how these things fit together. Then you can start producing all the other forms and things that you need. The other tip I would give is that when you're working inside a Dataverse, don't be frightened of it being CRM. Don't be frightened of it being Dynamics and Dataverse and so on. If a table doesn't do what you want it to do, it doesn't contain the fields you want it to do, you're not going to go and break it if you go and add your own table. So do that. It might be wrong, but it can be wrong because because of the way that they're structured, because they're all different parts that come into the entity, you can build that you wanted. You may find out lower down the line, actually there's already a table in there that does that. Well, then you can change your solutions to use that, but don't be frightened of it. You're not going to break anything. All you're going to be able to do is augment and add and learn all the different things that make up the entity. Learn about business rules, learn about business process flows, start using all of these things to produce that application or solution that you want. There used to be some time ago, people were trying to get more and more people to use Teams. Since the pandemic, that's actually expedited. But one of the things they used to do, and to get people to use Yammer, was say, let's have a no email day and see how people get on, how they communicate. Well, one thing I would suggest is let's have a no Canvas app day. So you've got to produce your solution, but you're not going to use any Canvas apps at any point. And go and create it inside, just using those components that exist as part of that table stroke entity to produce the solution that you want. And I've found that will give you, by blinkering yourself, you come up with a much more structured back end and the pieces that you need, and you'll suddenly say, oh, okay, maybe tomorrow when I'm allowed, there may be a little bit of a Canvas app that I could do some of this with. And of course, those Canvas apps, here's a beautiful thing, can go into your model-driven apps. Okay. So, we see our teams have gone a strange route. I've gone from Dataverse, and now I'm going to start talking about Dataverse for Teams, which seems a bit odd. But I would say if you've got an opportunity, you can go and get yourself a developer portal. Start using Dataverse first because everything is open to you. You can start looking at it. You can learn solutions, which is something you can use for application lifecycle management. Start using that because you can see a lot more of what's going on underneath. Your Xrm Toolbox will connect to that Dataverse, and you can go and have a look and build those queries and understand those things. Because when you move into Dataverse for Teams, or Dataverse Lite as you might want to know it, all of those things that you've learned, you will suddenly see and help you to understand what's going on in there. So even if you haven't got all the license and you've now got the license that covers you for Dataverse for Teams underside your Microsoft 365 license, I would suggest that you just get yourself a trial or get yourself a developer portal and go and have a look and learn that, because that way you're going to understand what's going on more inside the Dataverse for Teams. And also learn again, coming back to learning that language. Learn that language about what you need to search for so that you can understand what it is that you're doing. Okay, I've got that, so let's go and have a look. So we flick over into here and we flick over into Teams, and we're now, I've had open the Power App and we're presented with this. So we're going to go and look at build, and we've got a new starter team. It's gone and built us a Dataverse for Teams inside of our team, and we're ready to go. And then we look at this. We can see all the aspects that build up our solution. And one of the things we can see in here are tables. And when we click on this table, we can see this is beginning to look suspiciously like our Dataverse for our Dataverse. We've got not all the different types that make up our entities. We haven't got forms or anything like that. We've got relationships and we've got views. Yes, we can only create Canvas apps, but we can start thinking about how we put all those tables together. We've also got the complicated data types as well that we need to understand, which can be very different from SharePoint. If you were to take, for example, a Boolean field in SharePoint, they don't work in the same way inside Dataverse. You need to understand something about choices and the numbers that sit behind them. Again, you could use some of the tools that are available to learn that, but start reading about choices, how they work, so that you understand the different data types and the right ones to use them. What Microsoft have done is an excellent job inside of Dataverse for Teams is that if you were to open your app here, so if we go to apps and I go and start my new starters, so this is the equivalent app for my tasks for people who started, so they get given teams and off they go. And I can now create a table for the onboarding, and I can also create one for the mentors, and I can connect them all up. So while that's running away, I can show you that. To come back now, so we can now see that I've got down the side here a gallery, and I'm showing all the different elements of that task, and I can do the same thing with blanking off here, and you only do the completed by so far. So much the same, but I've got my users table in here again, same users table that I see when it creates in Dataverse. This my authenticated, not my authenticated users, my users, they're all in there, so they sit, so I can see all of those and I can connect up. It's the same. So if you were to come in here as a straight from your Office 365 developer and you go, well, why can't I connect straight up? Why is it not pulling all the users? Well, there's a similar thing going on. It's expecting people to log into your team before it knows who they are and adding them in, but they're going into a table. There's no hidden table like in SharePoint where we have to go and look at this hidden list to find people, or this is going into this users table and we can start linking to it. Now, what Microsoft have done is they've eased your path. So if we go into edit data in here, we get something that looks suspiciously like a table. This is actually the table that we're seeing underneath is actually the real Dataverse table, but it's just a nice fluffy interface on the top of it. So I can go and start adding columns and so on, and go and add all these different types of columns, very different types of columns than I have inside SharePoint, but I can start using them. I've got a yes and a no, what's actually going on under there, and that's the choice as we were talking about. So I've got this nice fluffy thing, but it's really important that you understand behind the scenes what's going on as well. So I would really encourage you to yes, use this, think about how you want to structure your data, but do go to the back end, have a look, because you may find that there are other types in there that you might want to use that are not applicable. You say, well, thinking to yourself, okay, well, I want something that's a bit more complicated than this. Those types, there are lots of different types going underneath. Start having a look, start investigating. You are looking at a slimmed down version of Dataverse, so understanding some things to do with dynamics and what's going on you need to do. And as things move more and more, say we do get model driven apps down into Dataverse for Teams, and let's hope so, you're going to need to understand it even more. Maybe we'll get protected from those horrible 2001 looking screens when we're in here, but you do need to think about what's going on in here and learn it. And the only way you're going to do that, I'm afraid, is to dip your finger into a little bit of the dynamics and start to understand it. Okay, so we've got there is we just pop over, and I can go and run these apps now. So if I just quickly go into here, we can go and look at my mentoring app. So I've got training app. Oh. Now I've got my new starters there, my new starter mentor. I'm going to go and open that, and I start to get my app. There we go. What do you want to go and do? Do you want to set up their onboarding? Do you want to set up their training? I can start going and doing that. So I say, oh, actually, I'm interested in setting up their onboarding. So I can go and do that, and I've now got some nice screens that are actually working out how they fit inside of here. But again, it's looking at relational database. It's looking at Dataverse database. Dataverse stuff. So I need to understand that, how my entities fit together, tables, how they fit together, what views I can use, because I can query those views, all of that type of things coming together. Okay. So if you're going to move from Microsoft 365 into Power Platform Dataverse, and the Dataverse is basically the back end of Dynamics 365, and as someone once said, you can think about Dynamics 365 as just another solution that sits on top of Dataverse. You are going to have to change your thinking. So they're called tables when you start going there, but think about them as entities. They are an entity that holds a number of different things about itself, being views, being forms, being the columns itself, being charts, all that type of thing. So think of it and say, yeah, they're like entities, but they're called tables. Learn all about all the other tables and not just what you can see. And that comes down to that. Get that Xrm Toolbox downloaded, connect it up, look at these different things, understand what they are, what they do, so that you can. There's a table in there that you're going to come across at some point called string maps. That's the one that allows you to work out what choice label it is, because underneath it stores a index against it, a number against each of the different choices, and you can go and start having a look and querying that. So learn about all the tables. There are lots of hidden ones away in there. If you want to start looking at approvals, there are approval tables in there, so you can go and start looking at where things are happening inside of that approval, what points it's at. So go and learn those tables. Solutions, haven't really touched on those, but solutions are this thing to do with ALM. They're your friend. They allow you to move things between environments. If you start looking in Dataverse for Teams, you'll see there's some solution tables in there. So hopefully, fingers crossed, exportable solutions are coming to Dataverse for Teams. But solutions, your friend, don't ignore them. Don't just keep building and building and building things. Think about how you put all those things together so that you can move them. If you create a table inside of Dataverse, when you're using solutions, it's very simple to just add that table into the solution, and it brings all of the parts that make up that table, all the bits of it that make up that entity, if you like, in. So it's your friend. You're not going to start coding and working things out and still into that low code, move everything together. My other tip would be as well, try and, like I said before, try and create everything as a model-driven app beforehand, before going down to your comfort zone inside of Canvas apps. It will really help with your understanding of what is going on. Learn licensing, and then learn licensing. This is how I had to move into this area because of the licensing change. Keep an eye on all the time. It's absolutely integral to our job. Make sure that even if you're using Dataverse for Teams, you don't stray into using premium connectors that use licensing. Equally, don't try and use clever workarounds. Don't forget that Microsoft own all of these things. They know what's going on. You're not cleverer than them, and their algorithms are looking out underneath. So learn your licensing. Don't get yourself or the people that you are working for into licensing difficulty. Don't use Canvas apps, then again, and get to know your compliance and governance. There's a brilliant compliance and governance white paper, and there's also the Excellent Centre of Excellence. One of the things that Centre of Excellence does is it uses Dataverse to go and get all the information about all the assets that exist inside of your various environments being containers for Power Apps and your flows. And it does that, and it pulls it all into a Dataverse. That is a great way to learn all about all the tables that it has. It uses solutions. You can go and look at those solutions, take them apart, see what they're doing, see how it's talking down, what tables it's pulling in, how are they creating that Power Platform admin review, all the bits that are coming into it. It's really, really useful to understand for understanding what's going on, but it's also great for being able to put the compliance and governance in. You will be surprised by what's there. So, things to know. When you're working with it, first thing that'll happen quite quickly is that you'll produce your model-driven app and your Canvas app and also can't see that. And that's because the security is all slightly different. So the security is based around those tables or even entities as they're called when you move into the setting up security. So very often if people can't see them or you get an issue, as with many, many things, check your permissions first. Remember, key point, field types in Dataverse are not always the same as you remember them from SharePoint or you know them from SharePoint. Please go and check, go and see what's going on, Google, try and understand what they're doing. The Xrm Toolbox is useful, please use it, brilliant for understanding what's going on underneath. Flex XML has cut down some of my work down by hours. So go and use it, understand it, because it will really give you a greater overview of what's going on. Just my tip there, when looking, make sure you search across everything if you don't find what you're doing. Calculator fields is a good one. If you type in calculator field, very often you get back SharePoint. If you type in Dynamics 365 calculator field, you'll get what you're in. You'll get what you'll need, where it gives you all the formulas and everything you need. It's not under Dataverse yet, so start looking for that type of thing. You can, just a tip, using Canvas apps to avoid delegation issues. Lots of people have written about that. Just search it and you'll find out. And not everything that you need is in the new user interface. So the new user interface is very much based on that. Oh, you know, click and click, not click and click. You know, click and move on. You understand low-flow development. Here you are. Here's more nice screens with Power Apps at the top. Behind the screens, there's a lot of dynamic screens. Dynamics 365 screens creating forms. Actually, if you go into a form creator that's behind the one that you see when you press forms, it's called Classic View. You can actually do a few more things. So just have a look, make sure, because they may find that there are other bits out there that would help you. Okay, so thank you very much. Hopefully that's useful. Don't be afraid of it. Start using it whenever you can. Get yourself that development template down and start using it. And that's it from me. Thank you. If you've got any questions, please ask them in the chat.